Okay, so my name is Stephen Scott. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called BigMouth Audio, and BigMouth Audio specialises in multi-location casting, voice production and sound design, primarily for video games and animation. We're based in Glasgow. We've got a studio in London as well, and an office in Toronto. And we work globally, really. So that's me. That's what we do.
Welcome to Scratch Claw Push, a podcast about artists clawing out a place for themselves in the world. I'm Billy Joe Cones.
And I'm Brendan Duke. Let's go.
Leading from that, I mean, where I want to go right away is, how did you get into doing this?
So I kind of like most people, I suppose, that work in any kind of sound post-production or anything like that. I kind of started off as a musician, when I was younger, playing music and all that kind of stuff, and then kind of got an interest in the technology and production side of it. So kind of moved into that area and started a studio, just a little tiny music studio in about 2008, recording bands and stuff like that. But it was a real kind of struggle to kind of keep that business going, really. But what we did have there was a really nice kind of booth, and it turned out it was great for voiceover. So we started kind of doing more kind of VO work, mostly kind of corporate ads and things like that. And it kind of just kind of snowballed from there, really. We started doing a bit of sound design as well, and then eventually got our sort of break, if you like, with a big client here in Scotland, an animation studio called Axis Animation, or Axis Studios as they are now. And they approached me and my business partner Phil to do sound design for two animated feature films they were doing with Mattel for the Monster High, that brand that Mattel have. And it was after doing that project, we kind of reached back out to the client and invited them down for a coffee, and just to kind of ask them, really, obviously what went well, what didn't go well in that project, but more importantly, what actually would be helpful for them as a client, in terms of a service from us. How could we help them grow their business? How could we help them be more successful? And what they said to us was, what would be really interesting is having an audio partner that can sort of plug us into different parts of that industry. A partner who knows great actors, great voice directors, great casting directors, great composers, all that kind of stuff. And so I've always been a big believer in kind of pivoting our business, when the time is right, and that's kind of how we ended up getting into casting and voice production. We took that on board, and that was really where we could provide the most service to our clients, was helping them with voice casting and on that side of things, and that's kind of what brought us up to speed, or brings us to kind of what we're doing now.
Yeah, and I remember that one of the reasons, or the reason really, that I wanted to have you on the show was a post that you posted sometime last year about the struggle specifically. And you posted like a timeline of the struggles of getting to where you are now. And so I would love to hear you speak to that a little bit. And our podcast is really to help inspire people who are out there doing the creative work and just not, the people who aren't really being proactive yet, the people who haven't found their place yet. So I would love to hear you speak to that a little more about your journey and the struggle of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of taking it all the way back to that sort of early stage of the music studio. So I think when I got out of university, and I worked a sort of office job, up here in Glasgow for a couple of years, and I knew I really wanted to kind of set up a studio and work for myself, and kind of carve out a place for myself in the kind of the local kind of music scene, if you like. And so I went through the various routes of doing that. Found a little studio space, convinced the landlord to let me rent it off him. He's like, no more recording studios, it's too noisy. I was like, but I want to work with folk musicians and keep it really acoustic and stuff like that. First week, full on metal band, that came, all the neighbours were complaining and stuff. But so that was the first setback, because then I got the phone call saying, look, if you're going to stay, you have to change your opening hours to be 5 p.m. till whatever, 1 in the morning or something. So so we did that. And it was that was a real struggle. It was about 4 years we ran that. And, I think anybody that's probably, been involved in music studios probably appreciates how hard it is to, keep a business like that going, especially at the time, home recording was becoming more convenient and things like that. But great memories and stuff like that as well. But that was the first kind of issue, getting through that. And eventually it kind of got to the point where I had so much debt. I couldn't afford to pay the rent at home or in the studio. I think at one point had a knock on the door on a Saturday morning, and it was the county court officers saying, we're coming back next week to start taking stuff, to pay your bills or whatever. And my girlfriend, or my wife at the time, or is now my girlfriend at the time, her family were kind of saying, maybe get your stuff out of there. Maybe this guy's not good news, But
so what did you do? I mean,
well,
did you get your stuff out?
I did. So what at that point, I kind of I actually ended up going down to my folks' house for the weekend, and I kind of said to them, look, I'm out of cash. I can't pay these bills. And ultimately, I'm just going to give up, I think, and I'll go and get a job. I remember at the time thinking I really wanted to get a night shift job in a supermarket, stacking shelves and stuff like that, because I thought that would be so quiet. It would be so easy. And that's all I want right now. This is too stressful.
I identify with that, because a couple of years ago, when things in voiceover were kind of hard, and after the pandemic, it was like just post-pandemic, I was thought about like going back and working in a nursery and like, working with plants, because I just get to help people and give them plants. And then the reality of it sunk in, like how low it pays.
Yeah.
So did that happen for you? Like,
well, it didn't quite get to that point. I was sitting at the dining room table, and my mum was like, "Yep, great. I'm going to give you, like £1,000 to pay off your bills for this month, and you can pay us back whenever. But you go back to Glasgow Monday and start looking for a job." I was like, "Cool." And then my dad came through, and he sat down, and he was like, this has been your dream to do this, since you were a little boy, really. You've kind of wanted to work in this industry. It's like, maybe, get a part-time job, but don't give up the studio, don't give up on it. Maybe just see if you can keep it there. And that was kind of his advice, really. So I went back, and I was like, okay, maybe I'll try and keep it on. But the first thing I thought I would do is I'll sign on to sort of, job seekers allowance and things like that. So I went to the job centre, and they told me that because you've been self-employed for 4 years, you don't qualify for job seekers allowance, but we can help you find work and stuff like that. And I was kind of annoyed at that. I was like, well, I've been creating a job for myself. I've been trying to create jobs for other people. I paid all my tax and everything, and when I need help from the government or whatever, it's not there. Shocker. So I was like, no way. So I walked out. I was like, I'm not coming back. And that's when I thought, right, I've got all this equipment. I've got this studio. I've got this booth. Forget about bands. Let's maybe think about doing business to business and getting into voiceover and audio marketing. Spotify was the thing that just popped up at the time, and we're doing Spotify ads and stuff like that. And so, and kind of, it was almost serendipitous because around that time I'd got a job to do some audiobooks, recording audiobooks with a local actor, and it was an amazing experience. I remember thinking, oh, this is so professional. The publisher had sent me all the copies of the books and all the manuscripts for recording, and I was like, wow, this is just totally different, and obviously the pay was so much more. And it was I was getting paid what I would per hour what I was charging for a full day working with a band. Um, so I thought, no, let's explore this, and I kind of jumped into that world of business to business, and I started going to coffee mornings and networking meetings, and and things like that, and offering audio marketing really was my plan for a year. And just we could do sound design, but we could also record telephone on hold messages, adverts, anything, and just see what kind of sticks. And I'd go to different networking events and things like that, and started to pick up little bits of work here and there. And then about 6 months after sending an email to a studio that were literally upstairs from me, an animation studio, they got in touch and they were like, "Hey, you pinged us an email, last year. We've just landed a contract with the BBC to do 10 short animations about Scottish history or something like that. And we need somebody to do sound design and music and record the voices. And, would you guys be up for it?" And it was just me, at the time. And I was like, wow, yeah. And it was like £5,000, which is more money than I've ever seen in my life, and I was like, yeah, amazing. And that kind of then allowed me to say, right, we're now a sound design studio. And we can specialize in sound for animation, which was another passion of mine. And then just from there, it was kind of following that belief, or staying true to that vision of doing the work that I wanted to do for the market that I wanted to do. And then that kind of tied into saying, well, what animation conferences can I start going to? And I'd start going to them and building up the network from there.
Before we get down into that, how long was it between your like low point of being like, oh, the government's not going to give me unemployment, to because that's what we call it here. I've been there. How long between that and when you got that contract from the 5,000 one?
I would probably say, maybe roughly speaking, about a year. I think maybe a little bit longer. I think it was probably about that.
How did you kind of stumble through that year? Because I know that's the we've had people on the show before who've gotten to that do or die point of like Jeremy Tao talked about this a little bit, where you're like, it's all or nothing. I'm in now, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what was that year like, or what did you do during that time to try to drum up business or get this off the ground?
Yeah, so I think for that year, it was, the first thing was it was switching to the business side of things, but also remaining open to working with a few bands and musicians that I'd kind of known for a while. They'd pop in and out, and then I think just having that kind of broad kind of offering of anything to do with audio in a business to business space, I would effectively say I could do it and offer it. And then it was sort of to drum up that business. It was a case of mostly doing a bit of kind of cold emailing, I think, which is something we still do today, which I know is some people like squirm at the thought of it, or it can be it can be a bit kind of taboo almost. But I think when you get to that kind of all or nothing stage, you're kind of prepared to sort of sit in the evenings or in the mornings and kind of just do that kind of boring stuff that needs to be done, and just researching on Google, and in fact, doing a lot of cold calling even at that point in time. I remember, just picking up the phone and phoning animation studios and stuff like that, and just kind of doing what I could. Uh, and I think having a kind of strategic approach to it, kind of looking back, I think it was a lot of these kind of little 1 hour voiceover bookings, which I mean, you guys will know. Back then, it was a studio. They would book a studio and bring the actor in, stuff like that, or we were helping to cast it. And so, in Glasgow, there's a lot of kind of creative agencies and sort of small sort of marketing agencies, and at the time, web content like little explainer videos and stuff was really popular. So, kind of doing that local networking thing was working quite well, and we started to become known as the place to go if you were a creative agency needing to do a voiceover for like a corporate animation or something like that, and very kind of quickly became the kind of go-to person, for these types of small businesses. And by no means it was making loads of money, but it was ticking over and paying the bills really. So yeah, I think that was probably the approach that kind of got through that first year.
So what is the biggest hurdle you have to overcome in going from, from music to now business to business and then back to kind of, I guess, I don't know what you call it, the middle ground of sound design, but now you're kind of getting almost back to that creative thing that you started out to do. What's the hardest part of that transition? Like, or what was the hardest thing to learn, or what's the hardest part about adapting the business again and again and again?
I think probably the branding side of it and how you position yourself. I think from the very start, even though I was, a sort of freelancer effectively, I always gave myself a brand or worked under a company name, just to kind of give it that sort of look and feel as if it could be more people, or it literally could be if it needed to. You could scale it up or whatever. And I think, and it's still something I think we struggle with today is getting that brand message right. So obviously, as you're kind of saying there, 1 minute you're sort of putting out into the world that we do X, Y, and Z, and then eventually you're like, actually now we just specialize in this one thing. And of course, it's not the biggest issue in those early days because you're not that well known. But I would say that's always the biggest hurdle to get over is getting that brand positioning right, and ultimately, what is it that we want to be known for? What do we want our kind of laser focus to be? And then being able to get that message across without it seeming like, oh, they don't know what they're doing. They keep flip flopping between different things. But when it's a kind of natural progression for a business, it seems to work, I think.
Well, to follow up on that, you're kind of talking about niching down, and a lot of actors that I've talked to in the past, they don't want to typecast themselves. They don't want to niche down. They want to do everything. But then the problem is they don't become known for one thing that people will go to them for. And so, it's that thing of like a good brand attracts as much as it repels, right? Like you're attracting the right people, you're repelling the wrong people. But what I've heard from other actors is, oh, well, I won't want to do that because then that's saying no to work. Like people will, and it's not true. Like I found the more you can just be an attractor for one thing, people go, well, do you do this as well? And you're like, yeah, I can totally do that. So has that been your case too? I mean, doesn't mean just because you do video games doesn't mean you don't know how to do the other stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's really interesting to hear that, because I've had a few people on LinkedIn, voice actors that have kind of said a similar thing where, they're wary of kind of being or niching down. But I think, and I totally get it, because it was the same for me in the kind of earlier years. It's really difficult, I think, to say no to, or at least think that you're saying no to business by sort of putting yourself in a kind of very specific pigeonhole almost. But I would say, without a doubt, it's been the the smartest thing that we've ever done as a business is kind of putting ourselves in a position where this is what we do. And even now, when I speak to clients, I'm very, I say we don't mix documentaries. We don't, we don't do anything other than, voice production for games and animation and sound design for game trailers and cinematics. We don't do in-game sound. We just do, and it's just being very specific about what you do. And I think for us, it's definitely been the best move we've ever made. Because you're right, over time you become known for something, but it's the knock-on effect. I think of once you make that decision, it becomes your mindset, and when it becomes your mindset, you know what events to look for, you know what studios and what decision makers to speak to. And I think when you're trying to be a jack of all trades, or cover loads of different markets or services, it's too overwhelming. You don't know where to look. Or the classic one is, speak to somebody who say, oh yeah, I went to that event in February, but I don't think I'll go back because I didn't get any work from it. I'll go to this other thing. And it's kind of like, well, if you have that niche, the sort of one or two or three events to go to year after year after year, as opposed to spreading yourself too thin. So for us, it's definitely been the best move, and it's interesting to hear it from an actor's perspective as well, because I could imagine, being on this side, although I don't, do casting and stuff like that myself, but I could definitely imagine that, knowing different casting directors, they, when they know an actor is, just so great at one particular thing, they're going to know that, person, I imagine it works in a very similar way. It's like that's the go-to person for that type of work or that type of project. Or, in the sound design world, a lot of our clients will say, do you have any designers who are specialists in, car engines or vehicles or weapons? And it gets really kind of specific. So yeah, I would always recommend that's the kind of the starting point, because then you can still take on work from other areas, but as you kind of go on, you can then start to branch out as well.
Mm-hmm.
Is it kind of just a case of like you're looking at a house and the house has all these doors and you're so busy trying to figure out which door to go into, and you're just like, at some point you just say, just get in the house. You'll figure out where to go once you're inside, but you've got to get in the house.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's definitely like that. Yeah.
My analogy was always, okay, you're in the middle of Kansas and you're trying to get to LA, right? Like that's your goal is LA. But then you're like, oh, but I see this thing and it's that direction. I see this thing. And all of a sudden you're like, you've tried to get to LA. It would have taken you maybe a week to drive there straight through. But instead, or not even, but, like imagine, take a little detours here and there. But all of a sudden you were like, you're somewhere in Ohio because you actually saw something shiny over there and over there and over there, right? Like that you never really get anywhere. And it's like, go to one place first, see if you like it. And yeah, this is very much an analogy, but it's true. It's like, try that thing out, fully try that thing out. If it doesn't work, you haven't lost anything because you learned things from it, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's it. There's always learning lessons, and as you say, I suppose it's also that kind of a question of why is it that you're doing it, and what is it that you want to achieve as well. Because I think it's really difficult when when you are in such a difficult state, when you just need cash and you need money. It's so hard then not to sort of just look everywhere for work. But if you can kind of have some sort of bigger picture in mind as well, as to if you want to work in games because because they're awesome, that's as simple as it needs to be. And it's like, I really want to be in that world, and kind of use that as the kind of driving vision to kind of get the quickest possible path to that.
Yeah, so I have a weird question. This is something I haven't asked anybody before because I didn't know it before, but I was at a voiceover conference this weekend and somebody on one of the panels said, don't waste your time I don't, that might sound kind of negative, but they were like, kind of like, try to connect with the people at the top. Like, go there first. Don't try to work your way up through the echelons, because they said it will take just as much time to develop relationships with the people at the top as it will with the people at the bottom. And the people at the top have more confidence, know what they want, know what's right for them, because they have that niche really nailed down, right? And the people at the bottom don't have that same confidence as the people who are working at the highest levels. So I'm just curious if you had any experience with that or what you think about that. Because that to me, I was like, oh, when I was younger, I tried to work my way up to the bottom thinking I can't go straight to the Guthrie Theater. I have to work at all these little theaters first. But now I think I was like, oh, yeah, they're right. I should have. So I'm trying to do that differently this time around. But yeah, if you
Yeah,
could,
yeah.
any thoughts?
That's an interesting one as well. I think from our experience, it probably makes sense as well, because I think if you're sort of aiming for people at the top, they can quite often sort of sort of refer you down if that's the way it needs to be, because they'll probably have decision makers on what it is that you need from them working for them, so they can quite often sort of refer you down there, or quite often it is, they'll just have a much more well-oiled machine, so they'll have the processes in place for for what it is that you're offering, I guess. Whereas if we were sort of pitching to a kind of much kind of smaller, kind of scrappier type game developer or animation studio, it can just sometimes be hard to speak to them because they're so busy doing multiple different roles, or generally just don't have the budget to work with us. They'll probably handle casting and talent management themselves in house. Whereas if we are sort of going to bigger studios working at the top, um, they might not know who we are, but eventually, uh, you know, you'll get one that'll be like, we'll stick you in our vendor database, and then like yesterday, I got an email from a new studio we'd never worked before, looking for some set up a call and get some quotes on a new project, and it was maybe we had reached out to them a while ago, and we just happened to be in their vendor database, and their head of studio had kind of referred us to one of his teams. So yeah, I would probably say that makes sense.
Would you say it's kind of like a case of having the courage to take that kind of the long view versus, like, a lot of us, we're starting out, we don't want to think too much of ourselves, so we kind of stay on that ground level where that's where all the scratching and the clawing and the everyone's just furiously trying to excuse me, trying to get in on whatever it is. Like, when you're on that ground level, it's just it's a mad dash. But if you're willing to kind of remove yourself, or just kind of like say, okay, just for a minute, I'm going to sit here and try to think like a CEO or one of the or head of production, whatever, and you take that view and you kind of sit back and say, is it having the courage or just the chutzpah or whatever you want to call it to do that kind of allows you to kind of maybe take those bigger steps or maybe find those opportunities, just because it's again, like we've talked on this show about the idea of manifesting, but not like in the woo-woo sense where it's just like, oh, I'm power of attraction, whatever. It's more just like, okay, I'm going to open myself up to these possibilities, and if I see a shot, I'm going to take it. Is it that kind of mentality that's kind of helped you advance, forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we first sort of started BigMouth Audio, and it was just me and my business partner now, Phil. He was just freelancing for me at the time. So this is kind of when we did the switch to business, and probably after that first sound design gig, and so we were in that next phase of like, okay, this is what the business is going to be. One of the kind of first decisions I took was I'm not going to sort of approach local potential local clients in Scotland or even in the UK for that matter, because it was it was saturated, and I felt that there was suppliers or vendors in place that were at that level, that were probably more well established, and so the first kind of decision we took was, let's think bigger than that. Let's not be afraid to jump on a flight and go over to Toronto or down to London or go to LA and just like set up meetings and totally blag it. Just be like, yeah, we're here to pitch ourselves and all that kind of stuff. And so thinking bigger right from the start was definitely a strategy, I think, that worked for us. And even now, hardly any of our clients are based in the UK. They're all either in Europe or now we're starting to sort of bring on more clients in Canada and the US. And so I think it is possibly having that confidence just to kind of think, I'll just think a little bit bigger here and see how that kind of plays out. And it's almost like that imposter syndrome thing as well, I think, is I don't think anybody really knows what they're doing, even even the people right at the
Is it
top.
kind of like making the leap from like instead of thinking fake it till you make it, just act as if?
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it. That's always something that we're talking about here, is acting as if we are the company we want to be, and acting upon that as much as we possibly can. We don't have cash reserves to go out and hire all these people or whatever, but acting as if we are 5 years down the line. It's definitely a strategy that we put in place, and yeah, I think it totally works, and it does kind of go back to that whole kind of manifestation side of things, and just sort of opening yourself up to those opportunities, but perhaps without realizing it, putting yourself into a position where those opportunities are perhaps available to you a little bit sooner than they would otherwise be.
Yeah, it reminds me of I used to do martial arts, so we would you talk about there are different lessons and stuff in there, and one of the things I would always when I got up to that point where I had to actually start like helping to try and teach others, one of the things like footwork, it's a big thing. Like you got to get there. You got it doesn't matter what you're doing with your hands. If you can't get in position, you can't. I would always think like one of the metaphors that came into my head that I also feel like kind of lends itself to arts and media and that stuff is like, you can be the best gambler in the world. If you can't make it to Vegas, you don't get the big money. So you got to put yourself there, to get those opportunities. And that sounds like what you're advocating for, is just put yourself there. Even if you don't feel like you deserve to be in the room, again, act as if. And then, it's kind of like the field of dreams. Build it. If you build it, they will come. Or if you put yourself there, who knows? Maybe you will get.
Yeah, I mean that's it. It's like otherwise, what are you waiting for? You don't need permission from anyone to go out and go after what you want to go after. The only thing that really holds you back at any point in that situation is a portfolio of work, and if you keep reaching for those kind of loftier ambitions, you will eventually get an opportunity somewhere on something that looks great in the portfolio while you're building up other smaller things, but you might find yourself in a position where and again, just thinking from our perspective, but you might not get to do a project where you're like doing all the sound design, but you might at some point along that road get introduced to a sound designer who's further on than you are, and they might bring you in to help on a little bit of something, and and that's just, I suppose, how it works, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for you said reaching out to people above you. Like there's something to be said for authentic passion. Like you said, the portfolio might hold you back, but if you have authentic passion for something, those people will see that and recognize it and will pull you up a bit. Like I've had that happen a few times in my life and recently, and so I want to transition to talking about your advocacy sort of in the world of LinkedIn, because that's how I first came to notice you was on LinkedIn, and you're out there advocating for people to not just cast within their local talent pool. And coming from a small talent pool in Minnesota, I get that, and I feel that because no matter where you go, it's like the same people working, and even in the big leagues, to some extent. At the conference I was at, they were talking about how for promo they might pull from the same 5 people a lot of the time, and there's so much more talent out there. So I would love to hear you speak about what is behind this sort of campaign that you've started on, why you believe in this so strongly, and what you think is important about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the reason why we're so passionate about it is, I think first of all, because we are primarily a Glasgow-based company as opposed to being a London-based company, we felt that firsthand as well, of how many opportunities you seemingly miss out on because you're not perceived to be in the place where you need to be. And when you kind of look at it, and again, from our perspective, it's such an advantage to be based where we are, because it's easy for us to cast actors who are in London, and we do it all the time. But we also have unique insight into uh, incredible pools of talent up here in Glasgow and Edinburgh that never get a look in, from all the casting studios down in London. Um, so I think, one of the reasons why I think it's so important to kind of put that message out there is that by kind of going to where the talent are, you're just giving yourself so much more access to a much more varied and sort of diverse talent pool. Because it's something that we hear from clients all the time, is obviously they always want to improve the diversity of their casting, and sometimes they'll say to me, "How do you approach that if we want to be more diverse in our casting? How would you approach that?" And I say, "Well, we don't approach it any differently to how we would approach the casting of the project. We just kind of we exhaust every avenue and we find great talent everywhere, and it's kind of as simple as that, really. And so I think after the pandemic as well, everybody kind of is more kind of switched on to the possibilities of remote working, and it's the same for voice actors. Voice actors obviously have the ability to work from home, but they also have the ability and are eager to go to studios as well if that's what the client prefers, and it's just a case of kind of thinking slightly beyond the norm, and just kind of really kind of improving on the casting side of things by being more open to the possibilities. If we did a video game last year, and the client were quite happy to cast it in the UK and in the US, and we did little bits in Europe as well. And it was amazing because we had this really kind of diverse cast of characters that had their origins in different different countries all over the world, and we were able to tap directly into that into those markets, and the final kind of cast that our team put together were fantastic, and it really sort of brought something to the game right from an early stage, because you could see how excited the client were to be working with such great actors that could really um, sort of tap into the characters' origins and the story, and sort of relate to those characters. And I think ultimately it just leads to a more immersive experience, which is ultimately what the client wants with games. And the reason why we always kind of talk about it is because we've kind of set up our business to be focused on collaboration with other studios. So we're not relying on filling our recording studios in order to cover those overheads, and therefore, having to work with local pools of actors. We kind of focused it so that we're not sort of relying on actual studio time as much, and that just allows us to sort of see more people. So yeah, it's really kind of a case of that. It's just trying to bang the drum for being more authentic, being more diverse, and just getting a little bit more creative with your casting.
So you're in Glasgow, and are there a lot of, because that's another thing, in the voiceover industry, I'm not in the video game realm and animation.
Yet.
Because I live in, well, but I live in Atlanta, and so people are always like, oh, if you want to do these things, you got to live where the business is. You got to live where the work is. You got to be able to go into studio. And so animation, you have to live in LA. Video games, probably also LA, but there's a couple other places. I think Austin, maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
So how do you see that changing, or what advice would you give to voice actors who want to get into that but don't live at a big center?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it is changing rapidly. I mean, in the last few years, we're seeing lots of actors move out of LA. And voice actors out of LA, out of London. You mentioned there, Austin is becoming a really great hub as well. And I think I definitely don't think as an actor you need to be based in one of these hubs anymore. And the reason why I think that is when we cast a project. To give you an example, we did a game last year or 2 years ago, and our casting team sat down with the client and they kind of discussed the brief and where do we want to cast and record this, and so they were, again, they're a European client, but they were like, I think we should cast this in the US, or LA was what we were looking at, because it's going to be kind of US accent characters and stuff. So we worked with the sort of main LA voice talent agencies that we work with out there, and it was maybe a cast of about 10 or 11 actors. And when the final cast was put together and the client had sort of made their final choices, out of those 10 or 11 actors, only one of them was actually based in LA, and the rest were, I mean, there was someone in Florida, there was someone in Vegas, there was someone up in Washington, there was somebody in Dublin over here, somebody was in Prague. And it's not like the talent agent were like, here's our submissions, but this person is in LA. Didn't matter to us, didn't matter to the client, as long as they got the actor they wanted, and we were able to record them in high quality. And some of those sessions were remote, some of them we booked them into a local studio. That's the only issue we come up with is clients quite often are like, we're not too keen on home studios for games. We would rather they were in a studio, and that's some clients don't care, as long as the quality is there. And that's how it is, I think, with most projects now. We just focus on casting. We just want to hear the actors, and then we'll find out where they're based, and we'll record them wherever they are. It doesn't really matter. So yeah, I think there's more emphasis now on just getting the actor they want, getting the voice right. Location, not so much an issue now.
What do you love the most about your job, or about working with video games and animation stuff?
I think for me it's it kind of goes back to this to story. I think like our mission at BigMouth Audio is to help tell incredible stories that create great memories, and that kind of goes all the way back to the start of the struggles and the difficult times, and then even before that. And I think having the ability to immerse yourself in a story, or just find entertainment in something, I think, is so important to everybody. And I think being able to tell a story and entertain people is quite a noble thing to do, or be part of that. Whether you're like running a studio or whether you're an actor or writer or whatever. I think it's a really important job, and I think for me that's kind of what excites me is the types of projects we get to work on, and I play games myself, and um, I think it's almost chasing like a really exciting project or a really cool project that's just fun to work on, and a project that your team are really happy and excited to be working on, and things like that. And ultimately that I mean that's really what excites me, is just are we getting to help tell a really cool story that's going to provide a few hours of entertainment for somebody, and maybe they'll look back and be like, oh, I remember. Yeah, like for me, I remember one summer, my best friend would come to my house, like it felt like every day, but and we spent the entire summer from school playing Metal Gear Solid, and eventually completed it like the first weekend back at school. And it's just things like that, I think these games and films and stuff like that, they just like leave a nice little kind of point in time in your head, and yeah, that's kind of why I love doing what we do.
Have you found that's the video, because video games in the last few years, probably last 10 to 15, have just gotten insane. Like I swear, I tell people all the time, I've seen better storytelling in some video games in a lot of Hollywood movies these days. Like just from, I mean, because I guess because you're not limited to that, okay, I'm going to block out this 2 hours for this movie, but with a video game, you can do it for, days, weeks. And so you've got so much more time to explore that story. Do you find, is that one of the things that kind of like, is that part of the attraction? It's just, you can dive down so deep into so many different aspects, or so, I mean, you're not, it's not a thing like you're not limited to like where you can go cast the thing. It's just like, if can they do it on the computer graphics? Okay, we've got, it's almost like similar to animation. It's like, if you can draw it, you you're, I mean, it's, I'm just saying, talk more about that aspect of it. Cause to me, like, I feel like a lot of people sleep on that and they really shouldn't.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's as you say, especially with video games, it's such a vast, um, a vast kind of open world of possibilities, and I think that is a really great point on the casting side of things. It really does allow you to explore it, and I always kind of feel like there was a point in time where it was more a case of just it's part of the process and it just has to be convenient, and let's just like bring in these people that we know are good. And but I think for our team anyways, it's when you look at a video game that has so much uh, lore in the story or whatever it might be, you can really get creative with the casting, and you can kind of sort of look at the character and their origins, and like, well, what where could we look to get an actor that was just this really really going to nail this, or is really going to kind of understand this character or their backstory or the journey they've been through. And I think approaching it that way, certainly our team get a lot more enjoyment from being able to allow their creativity to to bubble up to the surface. And I definitely know that clients love to explore that side of things as well, because, and again, like kind of specific to games, I find that people who make games are just absolutely obsessed with gaming and everything that comes with it. It's totally different to any other industry I've seen. So they love to get lost in that. I think some things with animation, I feel like animation can still be a little bit too kind of set in the ways of like certain types of producers who are just focused on like timescales, budgets, and like we don't really want to deviate too much from that. But yeah, it's a great point. There's so much opportunity now in the scale of these productions to let that trickle down into all the different parts that make it.
And one thing I've been like, even like games, like some of the more well known, like Clash of Clans, Boom Beach. Yeah, because I've had a thing like especially during the pandemic, I would just sit up at night like with my good headphones on, and like I'm just amazed even even in those games where you might not be looking for it, some of the depth of the sound design and the quality of it is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we don't do so much in-game stuff, but we do work on like the trailers and the cutscenes and stuff like that, and it always amazes me like the production value that they go to on a game trailer, even for games that aren't like AAA. It's just insane. Like the animation is incredible, and they're doing original music for it and stuff like that, and it's the depth of quality is incredible, and it kind of goes back, I think, to like people that make games are just they're so passionate about what what they're doing. Perhaps sometimes a bit too too passionate and maybe go over budgets and things like that. But at the end of the day, it's such a great format to be able to the creatives to express themselves on. That's for sure.
It's funny is you saying that about how much they put into the trailers made me think like you have to be careful. You don't want to overpromise, right? Like the Wonka experience thing that happened. Yeah. People show up and you're like, this is not the game we were promised.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've seen that a few times actually in game trailers where I'm like, wow, that looks amazing, and then you see game footage, it's that's not what I was expecting at all.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, there's definitely a few out there where you go like, this game looks incredible, and then you go play the game, and you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah, what is this?
Or it's not even a game. Like I don't know if you guys get the ads for Murder Mansion, and
oh yeah,
it's. I mean, Kathy Bates was in one. I mean, in these ads,
I think was it Pedro Pascal even did one
recently, right. And I'm like, you have Kathy Bates, you have Pedro Pascal, like you have all these famous people. And these ads are so well done. And I'm like, but I look at the game and I'm like, I'm not playing that. That's not my type of game. Yeah. Make a movie of this, please. Or make a game that, I don't know, is different than what it is. I don't know. But the storytelling is so good, though, like you were saying.
Yeah. And that's it, isn't it, as well? It's sometimes, where they putting the kind of the emphasis on, I suppose, and but yeah, it's a good point of you kind of have to give the audience a realistic kind of expectation.
Yeah, one of the things we frequently talk about on here is just like people and a lot of times in making opportunities or trying to make opportunities for others, they end up kind of helping themselves and making more opportunities for themselves. Have you found that to be the case with what you do?
Yeah, I think so. I think with we just before jumping on this podcast, we were recording our own one, and we're just kind of kicking off season 2, and it was we're just starting out with our voice director and casting director Donald Perry, because we knew if there's going to be technical issues and stuff, it doesn't matter. He'd come back and do it again, and I think that's a good example of we had kind of been working with Netflix for a while, and it kind of started off. I don't know how, I can't even remember how I got an invite to their kind of dubbing partners program launch party in London. I think I'd kind of put her name down for would be interested in working with them or something like that. Again, just totally overreaching. So I got this invite to go down to this launch party in London, and I was like, yeah, cool, I'll go down to that. And just, you know what it's like. You go down by yourself, you wander around like 5 times, too scared to speak to anybody, drink too much beer, and you're like, okay, I'm going to go home. And then just before I decided to leave, I bumped into somebody who I'd met, at a previous conference, and he was like, "Oh, you should meet Joe, who heads up the dubbing department at Netflix, who's putting on this party." So he took me out to this balcony and introduced me, and I got chatting to him, and I was like, we specialize in sound and voice casting for animation and games, and do you guys imagine you'll need to do any dubbing for animation? And anyways, long story short, it was like, yeah, we need people to dub preschool shows from American English into British English, and is that the kind of thing you guys could do? We'd never done anything like that before, but I was like, yeah, we could do that. He's like, okay, well, we should talk. And I was like, well, I'm going to be in LA in February. Why don't I swing by Netflix's offices? And we can chat about it. It was cool. He's like, yeah, great. I wasn't going to be in LA, but I just went home. I was like, for my business partner, I was like, we're going to LA next month. So we booked a flight and we went out and totally blagged it and timed it right or whatever. And so they were like, yeah, cool, we're going to onboard you as a partner. And anyway, so we started doing all this dubbing work with Netflix for their British English. And we needed a casting director and a voice director. So up until that point, we'd just kind of been casting it ourselves, or I'd been kind of casting and then sort of sending client samples, and so yeah, our sort of casting and voice director, he had never done anything like that before, but he was a voice actor that I'd worked with loads of times over the years, and I was like, he has got the personality to do this job amazingly. So I got in touch with him, and I was like, come and talk about this. And so now he's been doing loads of games and animations and all sorts, and that's his full-time job as a casting and voice director. And so so that's maybe kind of an example there of where we've been looking for opportunities for ourselves. We've been able to then sort of bring in stuff for other people, and I think for, again, actors in Scotland, where our head office is based, that's something we're always trying to get them more work, because they very rarely get opportunities from the studios in London and stuff like that. So we're always trying to like get them in for auditions and get them more projects as well.
I love that story because, like, yeah, you're giving away the secrets, but I love that story because that's something I just would never have thought of, especially when I was younger. Like, there's things, I'm just like, oh, okay, cool, well, we'll see you sometime, whatever. But, oh, we'll be in LA. And somebody recently was talking about this. It was at the conference. Somebody said, it's not a lie if you believe it. It's a George Costanza quote from Seinfeld. And so it's like, well, it's not a lie if you make it true, right? Like,
that's yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's just bending the truth slightly.
I mean, you decided right then. I mean, that's great. Like,
yeah.
Have you ever had any other moments like that where you were just like, I know what to do now? Like, because I've had those in my life, and I actually have one from my like childhood that I still remember, but like moments of such clarity where you're like, this is what I have to do, and this is the next path. Like, do you have any other examples of that?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. There's probably been loads of times where we've done stuff like that. I mean, I kind of wrote recently on LinkedIn about our Toronto office sort of launch, and that was a similar thing where, years ago I got invited to go on a trade mission to Toronto, from the sort of Scottish Development International. And it was really bizarre. I was like, yeah, I'd love to go because we want to specialize in sound for animation, and we know the industry there is really strong. So this was probably about 10 years ago. So there was me, but there was also like a guy that sold tartan carpets, and there was just a total mixed bag of Scottish companies. Somebody that sold like oat cakes or something. It was really weird, but so I went again. I was like, yeah, I went over to that, and I got to do all these tours of different studios, and that was kind of one of those moments as well where I was like, this is such a cool place, and this is a really great opportunity to sort of try and bring our business into North America. We should look at opportunities to try and make this happen, and so. And that again, that was just then a decision. Let's set up an office in Toronto, and it was something that took about 9 years to actually happen. Just through going back and then trying to find a partner, and then eventually finding somebody at a conference, and then trying to get something going, and then nothing happened, and then just making the decision again to say, listen, I'm going to fly out to Toronto and just book a flight and go out and have lunch with them in person and say, let's set up a business here, let's make it official, and that might push us to work a bit harder and making it work. So it's things like that. I think.
You mean being decisive?
Yeah, I think so. Being decisive, taking a bit of a risk with it, to some extent, but also just, for me, it's always just been just fun. It's just like, it's like my creative side gets allowed to do stuff through the designing of a business.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't good enough at playing the guitar and sound design and all that kind of stuff. So I allow my creative side to come out in in terms of the designing of a business and like just different cool things that we can do from that side of things. So yeah, I think it's just going to be decisive and having a bit of fun with it as well.
It feels good to hear you say that, because I was literally just thinking about that yesterday, about how much, as an actor, you don't think of yourself as a business. You're just sitting around waiting for someone to choose you all the time. And then once you start thinking about yourself as a business, it changes your mindset to such an extent, and it changes your outcomes to such an extent that, I went to school for theater. I thought business was boring. I thought business people were kind of not my people at all. And most of them probably aren't, to be honest. But that doesn't mean that they are all boring, nor that they all are not my people. It's like the entrepreneurs, those people, yeah, they're so creative. You have to be creative. You have to be scrappy. You have to do things like you're doing, be like, tartan salesman, I'm going to go with you to Toronto and, check this out. And got a haggis guy over here. You got a, whatever you got, I love that. Like, I love hearing the stories of the scrappiness and of the, like, let's just make it happen. It's really inspiring.
And I think it's a great point, for voice actors, and freelancers in general, thinking about themselves as a business. And I hate kind of using the example of people like Troy Baker and stuff like that, but there's a reason why they get so many projects. Or I'm sure I heard a story that he was telling about Death Stranding when he was just at E3, and Hideo Kojima just came up to him and was just like, I want you to be in this game. And he's like, okay, cool. And it's almost like creating a brand, I suppose, isn't it? And like casting directors are always still going to go to agents and want to audition people, and get the right voice. But at the same time, casting directors will always have a list of people in their head that they think will probably be quite good for a role, but they know are great to work with and easy to work with and bring ideas and get the project and have the right personality and things like that, which sometimes can can always go a long way to getting cast in a project if you're easy to work with. And then I think, especially nowadays, with the threat of AI and everything like that, I think, a voice actor that can bring more value to a project, in terms of maybe a bit of marketing, or maybe they've got their own audience, which doesn't need to be massive, but it can be an audience of people that love their work or follow their content, and that actor can then talk about the game or something they've been in with their audience or their community. And so yeah, I think, and it's same thing with sound designers. We're looking for a couple of sound designers at the moment, and um, there's always, we need something kind of specific this time around, but we normally have a couple of go-to people because they have at some point made themselves known to us, and easy to work with and all that kind of stuff. And it's so much more preferable than having to go back onto LinkedIn and put out a message and then have like 200 people contact you, and it's too overwhelming. So yeah, I think it doesn't matter if you're a freelancer or a massive business. Having that sort of mindset of like building the brand first and foremost is goes so far, definitely.
Yeah, you're saying, I mean, that people have to know who you are, like you, and trust you, right?
Yeah,
In order to
yeah,
want to work with you. And so a lot of actors are scared. Some actors put it out there all the time, but sometimes that can be a little like, oh, I don't trust this. They don't look like a real person. They look like they're just, because sometimes I think what actors share, it can come off as some people are turned off by it because it comes off as egotistical or self centered or whatever. And then other actors are just scared to put anything on social media because they don't want to be that other person. And so there needs to be like this happy medium of, here's a picture of my cat, and here's what I, I'm doing today. And then here's a project I did, whatever, whatever. Um, that there's some middle ground that needs to be had so that awareness is there without it just being like, I'm so great, right?
yeah, yeah. Exactly. And yeah, I mean it's a tricky one to kind of navigate. I think that kind of kind of glimpse behind the scenes stuff is always quite interesting. If it's even if it's just a video or a photo of in the booth doing something, um or anything like that. But yeah, I think you're right. It's almost like, as long as you're kind of popping up on the feed of like that casting director, or ideally somebody you've already worked with, and then it's just an easy way of just keeping in front of mind. um and the content itself sometimes is perhaps less important. I mean, I'm certainly no marketing person, but but yeah, that's the way I look at it. Is sometimes just popping up in their feed, as opposed to kind of annoying them all the time, with stuff they maybe don't want to know about. I don't know. But yeah, it's a tricky balance.
Well, we're already past the hour. I wanted to ask one more question, just as like a general thing. Like, for any people out there who are scratch and clawing their way into any creative industry, do you have any one last parting piece of advice?
Probably just don't give up. It's the best piece of advice I think I ever got, and it's probably what I would say to anyone else is, if you don't give up, there's always a chance that you're going to sort of break through at that next level or get to where you want to be. But I guess if you do give up, it's definitely not going to happen. So yeah, just don't give up, and just keep going.
Awesome. Thank you.
So, before we let you go, where can people find you online if they want to hit you up?
So I'm on LinkedIn quite a lot. So if you just look up Stephen Scott with spelled with a PH, I'm on LinkedIn. BigMouth Audio is bigmouthaudio.com. We're on there, and Instagram as well at BigMouth Audio. You can get us in all those social platforms.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming out, man. It's great having you, and we'll be keeping an eye out. You guys are doing a lot of cool things over there based on just what I've seen on your website.
Oh yeah, awesome! Thanks so much. I really appreciate being invited onto the podcast as well. I've been listening to your previous episodes and stuff like that, and I think it's likewise. It's I think the message of what this podcast is all about is amazing. And yeah, really excited to follow the progress and see future episodes as well.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks. That will be all for this episode. To keep up with the show, follow us on social media at Scratch Claw Push. If social media isn't your thing, you can contact us at scratchclawpush@gmail.com. To learn more about the show, visit scratchclawpush.com. This podcast has been a Carcutta Media production. This recording, or any portion thereof, may not be reproduced or used in any manner whatsoever without the express written permission of the publisher, except for the use of brief quotations in a review. Copyright 2024 by Carcutta Media LLC, all rights reserved.